everyone. I'm Devi, and I'm happy to invite you to this panel discussion hosted by MIRA Group in partnership with Mace. As an introduction, I head the data centers vertical at MIRA. And over the last 17 years, I've worked across multiple asset classes of real estate. And now with data centers, I feel the same wave as I felt back in 2005 when foreign investments opened up for real estate in India, creating a deluge of interest in the sector. Data centers is not a new industry in India, but the interest in the sector is new and profound. Last week, Mace and MIRA co-published a report on India data centers. To say that data is the new oil is slightly cliched, but its importance in our times cannot be overemphasized. Data proliferation is happening at a pace comparable to the current COVID pandemic, and it is here to stay. The Indian data center industry, and which we have covered in quite a bit of detail in our report, is on the cusp of a new evolution. With over 590 megawatts of capacity as of date, we could expect this capacity to more than triple to 2,000 megawatts over the next 3 years. If I have to speak in real estate terms, if India created 100 football grounds over the last 15 years, we can expect another 200 football grounds in just the next 3 years. And that's the enormous amount of data explosion happening. And with localization norms expected to come in, this capacity is going to end up being highly constrained. So is the data center story in India for real, or is it just a fad? Today, to discuss this, we have a very eclectic and a very diverse group of experts to bring out the trends and perspectives of this industry. Moderating the session is Shobhit Agarwal. Shobhit is the MD and CEO of MIRA Capital, and he has over 22 years of experience in real estate investment banking. Shobhit is the founding member of MIRA Capital, and he previously headed the capital markets function for JLL in India. Shobhit is joining in from Mumbai. On the panel, we have Dr. Benjamin Coorey. Ben is an expert in architecture, and he has secured a PhD in generative design. Ben is the CEO and founder of Archistar, an AI-based generative design venture that focuses on data center spaces. Ben is joining us from Sydney. We have Braham Singh, CEO of BDX Data Centers, a pan-Asia data center operator. Braham has over 30 years of experience in the telecom industry. He was instrumental in development of Hutchison's global infra assets, including data centers, delivery networks, and cloud services. Braham is based out of Hong Kong, but he's currently joining us from his quarantine at Nanjing. Next, we have Sumit Mukhija, CEO India of STT Global Data Centers. Sumit comes in with over 26 years of experience in the information and communication space. Prior to STT, Sumit has held leadership positions in companies such as Cisco, Microsoft, and Brocade. Sumit is joining us from Delhi. We have Nitin Gupta, Managing Director, India at Macquarie Infrastructure and Real Assets. Nitin comes in with over 25 years of investment and corporate finance experience. Nitin is a gold medalist chartered accountant, and he leads MIRA's real estate activities in India. Nitin is dialing in from Mumbai. Next on the panel, we have John Jeffery, Data Center Technical Director from Mace Group. John was the founding director of Mace's UK data center business in 2005 and the international technology business in 2014. John has over 40 years of experience in design, engineering, optimization, and construction of data centers. John is based in UK, but right now just escaping his quarantine or lockdown at Gibraltar. And last but not the least, we have Pawan Maini, who has also co-authored the Mace-ANAROCK data center report along with me. Pawan heads India for Mace Group, and he has more than 25 years of experience in building and infrastructure sector. Pawan is joining us from Gurgaon. With that, I'll hand it over to Shobhit to kickstart this exciting panel discussion. Shobhit, over to you.
Thank you, Devi, for setting that context. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from all different geographies. I have conducted many sessions. I love speaking on panels. It's one of my hobbies, I suppose. But I've never had such an exciting panelist and such diverse, more than from wherever you guys have joined. We've got AI, we've got data center operators, we've got design construction heads, and of course, project management and construction heads. I'm super excited to have you all. Thanks again. What I'll try and do is I'll pose a few questions to all of you and try and bring in, or at least for our audience and viewers, trying to extract some value, given we have all experts sitting on this panel. Let me start with Braham and then with Sumit. Braham, you operate data centers in APAC. I believe you have over 4 or 5 centers in Hong Kong, China, and Singapore. What we've seen post-pandemic is that almost all operators are expanding their footprints to service their hyperscale clients. Right. My question to you is that post-pandemic, what has changed? We've seen suddenly there is a large demand that's coming in. Is it the result of pandemic? Are we the beneficiary of the sector? Technology adoption, and just the fact that we are doing this call from so many different geographies, time zones. Is this affecting data centers in some way, and what exactly is the impact? Braham,
thank you for having me here. And actually, as we discussed a while ago, the pandemic has been, embarrassingly good for the data center industry, undeniably. I have friends who are suffering in their businesses. I have customers like my major airline customers are suffering. However, the data center industry is not. And my IT customers, the ones, the gamers, the ones with online payments, the ones who are moving their business online, they are not. Having said that, so your question is post-pandemic. A few days ago, Bill Gates said that post-pandemic, business travel is changed forever. It's never going to go back to where it was. And home office has come to stay. So he made these two comments. And actually, I had posted that 3 months ago, exactly the same thing, that business travel will never come back to what it was because of our personal experience. All of us are seeing that, we are able to conduct business very effectively using Zoom, using, the WebEx, using other video facilities. And the need to travel business class to London to press the flesh is no longer a necessity. We're closing orders from customers in Europe, from customers in China, without the need to meet them. Now, it's not total. I mean, I'm here in quarantine in Nanjing because I have to be here for my construction. So there are certain aspects which will require us to travel, but never at the scale we used to travel earlier. So that is gone. Office is gone. I'm actually challenging my team that from next year we all work from home. All my office space, even my office in Hong Kong, converted into BCP seats for customers. Heck, just make my whole data center just customer oriented. Have a few open seatings for us when we want to come there. We all work from home. It's practical. It seems to work. So why not? So these changes are post-COVID are only going to get more entrenched. And further, one more point. The COVID exacerbated it accelerated the trend, but it's been happening before. This whole move online, this whole rush to build data centers has been going on for a while before COVID. 4 years ago, or was it 3 years ago? I was staring. I had this shell in India, which was just lying there, 80 megawatt shell that was doing nothing, and I didn't know what to do with it. And my friend Sumit came and he wanted to buy it. He wanted to get it. And this is 4 years ago. 4 years ago, people like Sumit had understood that there is a need to build out large data centers in India and across Asia. So it's not as if COVID started it. It's the trend. It's just accelerated the trend, and because the trend has been there before COVID, it's going to continue after COVID. It's very clear. There's no doubt about it.
So in some way, would it be right to say that it acted like a catalyst, and what would have taken 5 years to do, perhaps is now happening in maybe perhaps 2 years, maybe three, but it is definitely fast tracked that whole movement towards data center.
Yes, definitely. But it's all, but it's not all positive, right? I mean, you also have a lot of I won't use the word carpetbaggers, but a lot of people who are not in the data center business who are now rushing in there, right? Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier once to you, the data center, the real estate market is very conservative. It wants to keep the money in real estate. So you have real estate sectors that are suffering. For example, office commercial complexes suffering, retail real estate suffering. That money is now moving into warehousing because logistics is hot, and data centers. So you're having a lot of real estate players who are coming in and getting into the data center business. And the trend is most prevalent, unfortunately, in India. And again, people like Sumit, who are the responsible players, NTT, STT, Control Apps, the responsible players have to face the brunt of this attack to the yield per kilowatt being done by these newcomers. And so it's not always positive. Let me just show you. Let's keep So the COVID has.
I'm going to ask Nitin to comment on this a little in a little while, but it's a good observation. I want to ask you one other question. Since you have the privilege of outside inside view, sitting out of Hong Kong and also looking at India markets and many other markets, and the fact that India is going through this whole digital and local economy, localization and digitization, which are the key markets that global operators are considering in APAC region, and where does India stand? So what are you hearing from your customers, especially the hyperscale guys, users? Where are we vis-a-vis the region, right? That's the big question that I want to ask.
So I can comment the region. On India, of course, my experience is we're just about to look at India seriously. So in the region let's start furthest east from Australia. Australia is the big outlier. Australia, for the size of its population, is a huge consumer and generator of data. It's a high-tech country. The only thing that mitigates against Australia really getting into the midst of all the action is the cost of transmission from Australia. That remains always a problem. But it punches far above its weight when it comes to data and data centers. So I would look very seriously at Australia to build out data centers. You can't go wrong there. It's a highly sophisticated society. Then you have, of course, Korea, Japan, China, and then you have the Hong Kongs and the Singapore. Singapore is huge, but now Singapore is having a huge issue of supply side constraints. So that is hitting Singapore. They have a lot of countries like Singapore, China, even in Europe, Netherlands are looking at data centers and saying, wait a second, these things, they're consuming a heck of a lot of power. They take up real estate. They don't give us the kind of employment we need. And so cities are generally, looking at data centers a little more carefully. So you have, for example, Singapore recently announced curbs that will extend on to the second quarter of next year. You have Amsterdam had banned data centers a few years ago. I think it's opened up now. I don't know what the status is. China is very careful with these tier 1 cities allowing data centers to come in. So the constraints we find in cities in Southeast Asia, in the desired cities, is not so much on the demand side, but supply side and power related restrictions that the cities impose. As far as India goes, I'm talking about the OTTs. The OTTs want to be in Australia. They want to be in Australia. They want to be in Seoul. They want to be in Busan. They want to be in Tokyo. They want to be in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Singapore, Hong Kong. Not Hong Kong so much these days, unfortunately. and they want to go out to the edges in Jakarta, in Thailand. In India, the interesting thing, and Sumit can correct me, is earlier we were all congregating around Mumbai and Chennai because that's where the cables land. So that's
right.
where everyone was. Yeah. So, but then, STT Sumit, I think he's now king of Pune because they were smart enough to capture Pune, and I think they're the largest provider in Pune. But then very soon, Pune may become a suburb of Mumbai before you know it. But recently, from what I'm hearing, the OTTs, the hyperscalers, are moving now into Hyderabad, into Delhi, and this is creating having builders look at those cities too. So this is my take on where the hyperscalers want to go.
It's very interesting that you are speaking about how some of the governments are measuring productivity and saying high power consumption and low unemployment, and therefore they're not liking it. I think India is on the other hand, where we're still kind of welcoming. I'm going to bring in now Sumit, since he operates I think 16 out of his 110 data centers in India, out of 8 cities. So there's no better person to comment on this. Sumit, I want to bring in the first question to you. There's been a upward trajectory of data centers in India. What's driving this? What is the real reason? Is it the policy intervention? It is genuinely the demand that's there. What's making this a noise? And Braham mentioned both in terms of demand as well in terms of capital. It seems like it's going to start shooting up.
Thanks for asking, Shobhit. So the Indian market was always hot. It did take some people a while to realize that, so I'm going to start with that. But on a more serious note, the Indian economy and Indians at large have been going full-fledgedly digital over the last 5 years, right? So there's internet connectivity, there is mobile phones, there is penetration is soaring, right? And digital payments are the preferred mode. Almost 100% of airline bookings are online. There is a clear tilt towards streaming media and binge watching, and the TV viewing habits have changed. E-commerce supported by fintech, which is pretty big in India. And of course, there are newer things like gaming and AI, which is promising. It's still picking up, but they're on the horizon as well. User expectations have changed in terms of what they expect in terms of performance. So they want, and data privacy laws that the government released also meant that the data centers and the capacities need to be nearer to the end users, right? And that's exactly what is happening. And how do you deliver these kind of services to users anytime, anywhere, using the device of their choice? It's by having local cloud services, which are again dependent on data centers as a bedrock, because data centers is the underlying infrastructure that powers the cloud regions as well. So these developments, along with some very supportive policies by the government, very quietly government rolled out GST, the Jan Dhan Yojana, where millions of accounts were opened. For all you know, even these cab hailing companies, when they come to India, in a span of 1 year or 2 years, they have put, for example, 500,000 more people who were drivers, not very literate. All of a sudden, they all use mobile phones, apps, maps, and those routing mechanisms, payment mechanisms, which are all online. So this is pure play inclusion at play, and well supported by the government and embraced by the enterprises. That is giving rise to this data, which needs to be managed, stored, disseminated to end users, and hence you need more data centers. Shobhit.
Absolutely, and to your point on technology adoption, you mentioned about these cab companies. We were on another panel which was being chaired by KV Kamath recently, and he narrated. He's saying, in my life, he's been a banker throughout, and he was a very retail oriented person. He wanted technology, banking to get into retail. He's saying what didn't happen for 5 years happened in 15 days. That you are getting vegetables from farmers fresh into societies.
Absolutely.
Saying it was impossible to break that chain of logistics. And he's saying India tried. It's not that we did not try. We couldn't do it. It's only in pandemic. And he's saying 15 days, all household ladies could access veggies from very fresh from farms. So he's saying, this has been crazy. But I'll come to one other question, which is also raised by Braham in his sort of earlier note, saying India just goes crazy when they see some opportunity. So of course, global operators are looking to come into India. There's no doubt, and they will because they're disciplined and they have the occupier relationships. But equally, Indian operators are mushrooming everywhere, right? So do you think there will be a situation where you get into oversupply of data centers very soon? And what will be the impact on pricing? Because this is always a problem, right? We get fragmented too quickly. I think our report talks about 143 operators already, but 12 people have 95% market share, right? So we've got, so many others trying to grab the same customer for racks. So what happens to the pricing and oversupply? Are you worried about it?
Look, the Indian market has very strong fundamentals. So there is demand for sure. And the demand is real, the demand is tangible. Having said that, there is an element, and again, this is my view, and I think Braham also touched upon that there is an element of hype that is gradually creeping into the market. And anyone who has access to land, who has access to power, and who has truckloads of money thinks that they can be a data center operator. And that has really taken the real meat out of this business, honestly, right? There are multiple dozens of them who either are in the process of acquiring a land or already have a land and applying to be a data center operator. And this is definitely going to ensure, and the risk is that there will be an oversupply in some micro markets like Mumbai and Chennai. Honestly, Mumbai and Chennai were big earlier simply because there were global internet players who did not have local capacities. So they had capacities back in Singapore, Amsterdam, back in US, and those guys wanted to address the Indian audience. So they needed something close to the landing stations. But with the data centers being in India, meant to service the Indian audience, why do you need to be in front of the cable landing stations anymore, right? So that edge location in terms of cable landing may lose its steam. So there are other cities which will be very, very promising, and we bet big on Pune in the past. We have had good presence in Delhi NCR as well. We are of course expanding in Chennai and Mumbai as well. So those are cities that we're not leaving behind. Just that we need to think of a more diversified portfolio as an ecosystem rather than just over concentrating on one or two cities, which will see an oversupply in the short to mid term.
So you're saying two micro markets, especially Mumbai, Chennai, will get oversupply. It's a real situation that can come up.
Absolutely.
Good. I'm going to bring in Nitin now. Nitin, you've been in Macquarie for a long time. You managed prop balance sheet, third-party funds, and most recently you've acquired a majority stake in a data center operator. What's your view on two things? One, I think there's already more money chasing the opportunity. So why is there the abundance of interest from the investor on data center? What's driving it? And it's global, it's not just India. I think people just want to pour in money on data center as if it's a promised land. So you put money there, you will definitely make it. It just seems like it can't falter. So what's the story there?
Sure. Thanks, Shobhit. I think for the reasons which were explained by Braham and Sumit, I think there's little debate on the various growth drivers, for backing the data center industry. So we have seen over last, it was already there, as Braham also mentioned, it was already evident pre-COVID that trends like digitization, etc., are underway. I think COVID has accelerated those trends, and as I think people are saying, technology has changed our life, and the kind of surge we are seeing in data consumption, I think, is driving the demand for data centers, right? And I think that, and because I think it's an emerging asset class, it offers good diversification opportunities, there's a good demand-supply balance right now in favor of demand. In global investors are attracted towards this asset class, right? And I think the point, which again both Braham and Sumit mentioned, it's a specialized asset class. While in the near term, some players who have some elements of the business model may think that they can capture the entire value chain of the business, they will soon realize that they will falter somewhere and they will not be able to make a good successful model, right? The established players who know what is needed to make a successful business model and remain in the business for long term, they'll emerge as winners eventually. And the good part of data center business, Shobhit, I would like to mention is the customers here are very sophisticated, right? So they know that who are long-term players, who are short-term players, and who have the capabilities to sort of stay with them. Because for the customers, the data centers are like they're a critical part of the business chain. So they cannot falter on that part of the sort of business element. So I think eventually the sector will weed out the weak players or incompetent players, and we'll be left with only players who are really strong, have good operating capabilities, and are well funded by investors.
Okay, so I think you bring out an interesting point. You're saying customer knows best, and they are very sophisticated, and this is a critical operation for them. Talking about this, I'm looking at data center, and we do a lot of work in general in real estate. When you compare it to offices and hospitality, data center comes in with three different sort of aspects. So of course it's real estate. Then it's also got a play of infrastructure because it talks about power, fiber, all of that. And then of course it talks about technology, right? So it is complex to assess. You're right. It's critical. It's also complex. How do you evaluate this differently from all other investments in real estate? Is there a different evaluation matrix? How do you look at returns? How do you look at exit? What long-term mechanisms do you look at? What's different about investing in data centers?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, data center is a specialized asset class. It requires significant and deep operating expertise. We don't think that a normal real estate developer can enter this field because while you can build data centers, right? I think leasing data centers is altogether different ballgame, right? Which a normal developer cannot capture, right? They can do it by hiring team. I'm not saying that they cannot do it, but they need to build those capabilities, and building those capabilities will take time, right? So that's one. So I think when we approach this sector, we look at our partner very carefully, their capabilities and their track record. And they may be like, if we are backing international operator to come into a market like India, maybe we need to take care of how they'll capture the value chain around the land acquisition, approvals, and development, right? Which they may not be well exposed to and may not be in a position to manage those risks. So whether we do it through a partnership with a local player or we outsource those arrangements to a local player, I think is a matter of sort of a debate and various options analysis. But clearly, I think the operating capability is very important in this sector. The second is, I think what also we noticed that in our discussions, while the operator is important in this value chain, equally important is how do you acquire land and get approvals and do development. Because there are few large international operators, they have never operated in a market like, say, India, and they are finding it challenging. Right? There are some instances of some international operators coming into India, acquiring land on their own and getting stuck at different levels of development process. So I think it's something which we need to, I think, evolve. This has just happened over the last couple of years, and we need a good partnership model running here between sort of an experienced operator and a local developer, right? I think either or may not work. It needs to be a good partnership model. The other thing is, I think that we are also just examining, I think that some of the points we touch upon is the business model, whether you need to be more focused on hyperscale or the colo model, right? Again, there's strong preferences for hyperscale from infrastructure angle because you get long-term contracts to back your cash flows and something which people feel comfortable with, whereas colo gives you some flexibility and maybe upside down the road. So those are some of the things. And I think on pricing, I must say that we are seeing a bit of pressure coming in on pricing because lot of supply will come up in the market over the next couple of years. And if that supply comes up while there is good growth in demand, whether that rush of supply in the near term would impact pricing in the near term. I think there would be some pricing pressure in the near term.
Yeah, you're resounding what Sumit and Braham also alluded to.
Yeah.
But Sumit,
and whether that supply will get sustained over long term is something which I think one can debate. But I think in near term there would be some pricing pressure, and accordingly, I think all of us, when we are investing in this business, would need to take that risk into consideration.
So you're essentially saying you take the operator risk first, and then deal with the local situation through non-traditional joint ventures or partnerships. Sumit, I want to bring you in here as well. I did mention at the start saying data centers are slightly more complex. We were asking Nitin on evaluation metrics on financial side, but what about operating side? Is it really that complex? Because when we talk to some of the occupiers, they genuinely have a separate real estate team and a separate data center team. Why is that? What is the problem with, or what's the complexity with operations on the data center side?
Operations, Shobhit, is one of the most under-talked about subject in data centers. I mean, and having said that, it should be one of the most important, and it is the one which is most important to the customer as well, right? And unfortunately, in customers also, there is a site selection team which does not really care about operations, and then there is an operations team which only cares about operations. So operators like us and Braham and some of the other respectable operators, we will try and bring these kind of teams together from the customer side, even try to bridge their expectations as well. So that's one complexity. But of course, operations is a very subjective word, because it could have very country-specific issues as well. I'll share with you some data points on the COVID situation. While it was, like Braham said, embarrassingly good for the business, but for the operations, it was a nightmare. In the sense that you have operating facilities which are supposed to operate 24/7, and you have operations staff who cannot do it remotely. They cannot be asked to work from home. They have to report to the site, and yet they are risking leaving their families out and reporting to the site. So we obviously have had to do special allowances for them, some boarding, lodging arrangements for them, company paid transportation for them, hardship allowances for them, just to keep them motivated. Availability of spare parts, the movement of spare parts, issuance of electronic passes for these guys to move around freely. They have to prove that they belong to an essential services industry, right? Otherwise, they're treated just like any other office employee venturing out for fun. So those are the challenges that we face. And then, if there is any specific, let's say, preventive maintenance which is planned, the customer will not allow, because the customer is not confident whether we are having the required kind of support, the backend support from OEMs or from spare parts perspective. How soon can we revert to the last known situation in case something goes wrong? So preventive schedules have to take a back seat. Operational aspects are, tested in situations like what we have gone through in the last 9 months. And this is where, Shobhit, the DNA of the company comes to the fore, right? And this is where the existing players, the people who know how to run, not only design, build, but run data centers, will shine through as compared to people who are using this as more of an opportunity to make some quick valuations.
You're absolutely right, Sumit. This is a very tough part. It's almost like running a hospital. It's 24/7, right? You can't shut it down. You can't do anything. You need to look after your customer, which are your employees. You mentioned very quietly on this one, saying there's a site selection team and there's an operations team. I'm going to straight jump into Ben. He's developed some interesting software, generative design technology. My question to you, Ben, is what are the key search criteria that some of these data center operators use to locate their sort of preferred sites? And how can technology assist in that?
Yeah, thank you for that. What we've built at Archistar, and I think it's technology that's coming up, more and more, is essentially a tool where developers looking for sites can really start to have a data-driven approach about how they acquire and find sites. And what we're finding is that by overlaying a lot of data sets that are relevant to your search, you can really start to fast track that solution finding to identify those sites and to rapidly assess if they're going to be feasible or not. And I think some of the interesting ones, there's a lot of geospatial data out there. There's a lot of data sets that you can use, but I think some of the interesting things is when you start to overlay them, put them together and merge them in a way for a specific purpose, it starts to get really interesting. So, if we're looking at data centers in particular, you need to know a lot of things, and they've all got to come together to make it sense for this to work. And if you start to look at, locations of substations, proximity to high power electricity lines, where are the fiber cables, proximity to transport. Sumit said that whole operations and site selection, like bridging that gap, like how can, we've got to operate this 24/7. Can people get into work? What's the demographics around that area? What's the workforce around that area? What's the population there? Is there housing there nearby? Can we understand the neighborhood of what we're doing there? And not just from a population of workers, but what about the businesses around there as we start to localize that, and maybe we need to put it in specific places to service those businesses. So, there's a lot of data out there on not only the infrastructure that's around, but also the existing population, the existing workforce, the existing buildings out there. And I think once you start to put all that together, that's kind of that one layer of detail. And then you start to look at additional things like hazards or risks that could be associated there. So is this in a flood zone, or is this in a bushfire zone, or is there any hazards that if we don't understand that or don't know that, immediately, like that could cause us trouble down the line, or we have to think about that in the design and construction, or maybe it's not suitable. So I think you bring all of this together, and that's already a lot of information that you've got to kind of calculate and bring together to make decisions. Then it comes down to the planning rules and what's possible, what's allowed, so bringing that in as that extra layer. And, we've done a really good job in Australia, and we're building up our data sets globally about starting to bring all of these layers together into one easy to use interface that you can start to intersect this, start to plug in your filters and your criteria to really start identifying these sites really quickly. So it's really interesting space that I think overlaying all these together, it really lets you fast track that decision-making process. And it's really bringing that risk, rather than seeing that down the track, you're bringing that right up the front. And how many sites can you explore if you've got all of that data at your fingertips? And it's almost like instant, 30 seconds, turn these on and really start to use that data and drive your decision-making through data layers. So that's the start. Yeah.
But I know what you're talking about because I saw it, but I think some of these guys will need to go through it. Sumit, just to add, how much time does it take you to do a site selection for data center? And perhaps then I can ask Ben, can he fast track that for you? Because he's got this amazing software that is built around this, which largely talks about site selection. Sumit, how much time does it take for you to ordinarily locate a site and approve it?
It's a very complex process, and especially in a country like India, all the data points which Ben called out are definitely some things that we have to check through. But the biggest concern that we have seen is the land ownership itself. The layers and layers of owners of land. You finalize on one deal, and all of a sudden, somewhere during the signing process, you understand, oh, this is not the owner's land. This belongs to his son's friend's sister, or something like that, right? So my point is that the ownership in India has been a very, very big challenging mark. There could be a farmer who can stand up 3 years down the line and say, this was my land, someone acquired it forcibly from me, and the report sent to me. So ownership of the land is something that we are very, very anal about. we go a long way in analyzing who actually that land belongs to. And of course, all the checkpoints related to substations, power, flooding, crime, availability of skilled manpower. To me, it would be at least a 6-month process in India.
Well,
Yeah.
can you fast track that? How much time does it take for somebody in Australia to do this?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
No, it is dependent on the data sets that you've got. And, like countries like Australia, there's very rich data sets. Singapore's got very rich data sets. Where you don't have the data sets, it's not necessarily a problem if you've built up your own data yourself. So if you are researching and you can start to build up your own data sets and bring them in. If you've got them in the system, a lot of that can be fast-tracked, automated, click of a button. And, Shobhit, you've seen the speed of the system. It's like tracking that. And I think where that goes, and I can talk about it a bit later, is that once you've identified sites, we move into what we call generative design, which actually lets you test out the design immediately as well. So you might find a site, what's the capacity of that site? How can you quickly model and test it out without having to go and start talking to an architect at the start? Can you do this in your site selection and bring that forward so that you're not only finding the suitable site, you're not only understanding what's happening around it, but you're starting to understand the design of that data center, and is this going to make sense from an operations point of view? So, but yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of room to fast track the process, and we're just getting started with this. So I'm excited to talk to more and more people about their processes and how we fast track that.
So Sumit and Braham, actually, one of the points that we've seen in India is that whenever an opportunity knocks on the door, there is more capital that shows up. And we worry about competition creeping in, but actually the key or the crux is speed to deployment, right? So I can raise $1 billion, I can raise $2 billion, $5 billion. The problem is what you stated, Sumit, saying 6 months for a site selection, and there's a high chance that there is a failure at that level because the title does not come out clean, or there is some environment issue or hazard issue which Ben spoke about. On that very subject, I want to go to John and talk about he's a data center specialist in terms of construction and design, and I want to ask him the very same question I asked Nitin, saying how different is this asset class to design and build than regular hotels, offices, and retail, which are very predictable in terms of how much time it will take, each country to its own, but we can well estimate from start to end. Once the site is acquired, it'll take 2 years, 1 year, 5 years to build it. How quickly can you set up a data center, and how complex is it? So what do you, John?
Okay, thanks, Shobhit. So I often get people say, well, a data center is just a big shed with a lot of fancy MEP stuff in it. I personally think it's a lot more complex than that, and I think it's a specialist subject in itself, a bit like it's a specialist asset class, which Nitin said there. So the main difference, I think, in people understanding a data center to other types of assets, physical assets, is such as offices, is that those type of things you can generally understand what their purpose is quite quickly. Anybody particularly can understand an office is to house people, get them in there safely, let them work nicely, do their daily ablutions, and go home. So you've got everybody can understand that. But in a data center, you're moving, its sole purpose is there for security, processing, and storage of data, which you can't see and you can't touch as a human. So I think a lot of people struggle to get their head around that, and a lot of designers don't therefore understand they're building something that is purely for that purpose and nothing else. And the way you would design a data center therefore has certain nuances in terms of how you lay it out. The way you lay out your network rooms and your network topology is the backbone of it, and not the way people move through a building. That's a secondary. So in terms of differences to other types of facilities, that's sort of the main thing. And then I think the second bit is that, I mean, there are some types of facilities, such as energy plants and so on, where which are akin quite closely, I think, to data centers, where we would typically spend probably 1/3 of the project duration actually just doing commissioning at the end of a job, proving proving and demonstrating in every failure scenario you can think of that data center will stand up. That can be 6 months plus on a hyperscale job, and that's a certain complexity in there. So we have, for example, specialist HV engineers, approved persons who are used to switching high voltage systems, who are used to building substations as part of our data center team, because they are a highly complex thing. And then specialist commissioning engineers who really understand the 5 levels of ASHRAE commissioning process through to ensure that when we hand a job over, it's going to run, and it's going to give the reliability and resilience and uptime that should have been designed from the outset. So those, in terms of differences to normal construction, I think those are the keys, and therefore it is a specialist design and a specialist construction market.
Absolutely, John. I don't think Braham and Sumit were smiling when you said that it's a specialist asset class, and I am sure they built enough, and they completely agree with you. I suppose I've not asked Sumit and Braham, but I think that you're absolutely right, that post-construction commissioning itself is between 6 to 8 months of testing it rigorously to make sure that it survives all kinds of weather conditions and hazards and everything else. Didn't realize that it takes that much time. I have one related question now. 5G is coming in, data is moving closer to the edge. Will this change design for data centers, which means they will go more vertical than horizontal as they were traditionally? And will they move closer to the cities?
Okay. I think the second bit, yes, things will tend to be, you'll tend to have data centers nearer to cities and second tier cities and so on. In relation to whether they go vertical, I think that's very much a dependency on the land availability, the type of data sets that Ben was just talking about there. In Europe, and I'm mainly dealing with Europe, we typically see single or 2-story designs in the suburbs and outskirts of cities and second tier cities. But we know who owns bits of land, unlike in India by the seam of it. We know where the fiber is, we know where the power is. It's fairly simple. But you get outliers of that. So in London, such a huge place, of course. So we are seeing developers looking at 6, 7, 8-story buildings well, you wouldn't say the inner city, but the outer city in London at the moment. So there are plays on that. But in the main, across Europe, it would be single, 2-story on large, multiple hectare sites. As I say, you might get some differences of that. So if you have smaller parcels of land, then certainly, I mean, Singapore, everything's vertical, of course, and I'm sure into India that would be the case with your land ownerships and so on. So I think there's a big difference there. Now, what I would say is when you go more vertical, things get more complex. I've seen many vertical data centers where they've run out of space, not because they've run out of space in their data halls or they've run out of power, but because they've run out of space in the IT risers. And they literally can't thread any more safely fiber cables through between different floors to suit their colo clients and so on. So the planning, I think, that goes into a vertical data center is even more important than into a horizontal one. And it should really start around how's your fiber backbone going to work in that building. So.
Thank you, John. Sumit, would you tend to agree that there will be some technology changes that will allow this limitation to change, saying, we'll have risers, or we may just do away with something like that? Is there anything that's planned? I know you built a multi-story data center very close to where we are sitting in BKC. How does this work?
Yeah. So in India, data centers have traditionally been vertical only, primarily because they are concentrated in the main cities, right? And sometimes even in the heart of the city or in a suburb, which is now practically part of the city itself, right? Like Navi Mumbai at some point in time would have been a suburb, but today it's not, right? So data centers in India are vertical, they're not horizontal. And yes, it is all about planning. It has to be very diligent right from the beginning. So if you have 7 floors fitted out with, let's say, 3 megawatts each, 20 megawatts is what you need. And in order to have 20 megawatts, you need to have those many fiber runs, those many electrical runs. So typically in our new builds, the number of shafts will be like 40, 50, and they are well planned. They are, they will support future expansion. But in the legacy builds, exactly the same issues that John called out will come up. So it's a matter of design. It's a matter of planning ahead, and which all the new purpose-built data centers in India, I think, are taking care of.
So you're saying both are possible, and India will continue to see more vertical than horizontal, given the land situation.
Unless tier 2 cities infrastructure develops, power reaches their uninterrupted supply of power, fiber reach happens, and we get, the land is cheap. So what we need to do is to have the infrastructure there to develop data centers in tier 2 cities or the far off suburbs. But otherwise, one more aspect which we tend to ignore, and this is more of an operational aspect, is we can't create data center wherever the land and power is. We also have to look at where the skilled manpower will be available. We also have to look at the peering mechanisms, because many of these internet players have peering mechanisms either with the service providers or between themselves or with the content players. So it takes years to develop that ecosystem. You just cannot pick a random new place and build a data center out there.
So you're saying there is a complexity on the occupier side as well. You mentioned about power. I'm going to move to Pawan. Pawan, of course, has co-authored this report. But Pawan, my question to you is, you've built enough airports, ports, perhaps a few data centers. Does India have a unique advantage on clean and green energy? We are the 5th largest or amongst the top 5 producers of renewables, hopefully moving towards number 3. So there's a lot of capacity that's going to get installed. Are we going to skip 1 or 2 levels in producing green, sustainable data centers or hyperscale data centers? Is it going to come in our advantage, is my question to you. What's your view on this? How are airports running? How will data centers run?
Yeah, so Shobhit, thanks for that. I agree with you. Just like India has been able to leapfrog technologies in other areas. For example, in mobile telephony, right? That's oft given example how the whole landline sector, we just ignored it and then just everybody moved on to mobile telephony. The explosion we've had in green energy has been also phenomenal. When there have been so many now government initiatives that have really pushed forward the whole manner in which the green energy has moved forward. And whereas initially there were government initiatives, people soon started seeing how it made pure business sense for this to happen. And I think it's the culmination of those two. You talked about how we are already in the top 5, reaching top 3. It's kind of success begets success. So once you start building it up, that kind of a basic infrastructure to be able to have the green power, the green energy. I think even from a global perspective, what India has been able to do from a climate change perspective and take a lead in terms of the participation. I think both those things coming together have really helped. The third element I think that's helped possibly is maybe more from the capital perspective also. Where you had international funding organizations, whether it was IFC and others, who have also come in and they've been applying the Equator principles, and then again there's been almost a requirement for certain providers to start looking at more environmentally sustainable ways of growing. And again, while they may have been painful in the initial phase, they've seen how that has helped. The last part of it, I would think, from this perspective, is also the kind of fiscal incentives that the government has been then giving. So whether it's kind of tax breaks that they're giving certain duty that they are forgiving, whether it's for a targeted, say, a 3 to 5 year period, or if it's even for kind of in a more geographical perspective. So sometimes, for example, Maharashtra, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh have done some specific targeted initiatives from that perspective, and that's then helping the growth from that sector. So I think it's a number of different elements that have come together, which are really helping the green energy really pumping in a much faster pace.
And Pawan, just continuing on that one, you've been in India, you've seen other sectors. Indian government has come out with a draft policy on data centers. They've also declared data center as essential services.
Right.
I have a question which is more broad-based, and I'm going to jump from you to Sumit and perhaps Braham and anybody else who wants to contribute. And my question is government doing enough? And this is exactly opposite of what Braham started saying. Some governments are actually banning this because of low employment and high voltage or high consumption. Indian government is doing the exact opposite. And how much are they going to help, both in terms of capital and in terms of operations? So I'm going to just open this question, Pawan, after you've spoken to other people to come in and speak about.
I think, Shobhit, the government's really done quite a bit. I must admit, in this area, things like the national e-commerce policy, the personal data protection bill, the policy on data center parks, all of these things are helping quite significantly. And in terms of the data protection and having to localize the data, that's had a huge impact. And while it might at times we feel that the government's not doing enough, I think in this particular sector, they have been quite helpful. The other thing, as we all know, and I'll draw a parallel from a completely different sector, it's transportation. So in India, the demand for transportation, urban transportation and public transportation is so much. You could take any city and you could lay a public transport, a metro line, and it'll immediately draw people. And I think that's what's happening from a data perspective also. Devi alluded that right at the beginning. There is just so much demand. So while, yes, in the West, people may see it differently, it's not generating opportunities or other parts. Over here, we just need a lot of it. And we will need a lot of it for several years to come. It doesn't matter where we put it. Yes, right now we are focusing on tier 1, we put it in tier 2, we put it in between. I mean, there's just going to be an explosion of demand that's going to happen. And I think with those policies that are coming, and working together with it, I think that's helping it quite a bit.
Super. Sumit, you want to add something? Because I think he said it from a very holistic perspective. You deal with it on an everyday basis. Are you happy with the changes that the government has introduced, or there's still a big wish list that's left?
The wish list is pretty much there, but I must say that the government has taken some very progressive steps. This is a very good direction in which things are moving in terms of government recognizing the need for having quality data centers and supporting the data centers and their development in India. But the policy is very much at a draft stage. It's very directional in nature. It's very high level. It has perhaps a 50,000 square feet view currently. It has to come down. Look at the real world problems that we face as operators. Look at the number of windows we need to knock just to get the groundbreaking done in our sites, to even select the sites or to get the power sanctioned. I will not name the state, I will not name the person, but I got told once that, oh, you need 10 megawatts, I will power 20,000 villages with that power. Why should I give it to you? Right? So that's the kind of replies that I've received in the past. So my point is, and we also need to have a policy which will be a level playing ground. As we alluded in the very beginning of this call, that there are a lot of new players with truckloads of money and maybe just land bank or just power assets, and they now want to get into data center space. But what happens to the hardcore operators who live and die and whose bread and butter is these data centers, right? We know the return profile for years. We know how to operate and keep the lights up and running for years. We're talking about 10, 15, 20 years of experience with some of us serious operators. So how do we get a level playing ground from those real, the new players is the real challenge that I will throw at the government as well. Right?
I know we're almost running out of time. I have one general observation. I think all of us have agreed that India has got a huge potential and that there is opportunity for growth. But what's your big concern? And I'm going to put it very simply, that if you had an extra investable dollar, would you put it in India, in the Asia-Pac region, or would it be some of the other regions? Are we ready to receive these dollars is my big question, right? I think we're clear that digitization, localization, policy changes are all very good. But are we ready to receive this? Do we feel ready? Is the opportunity really scalable? I had 2 calls, and I don't want to name the investors. And they said, yes, we'll be very glad to put $500 million or $1 billion, but perhaps 2022, not 2021. So are we really ready yet? And I'm going to shoot straight from Braham, because you're doing multi-country. Maybe you want to take this up first, saying, are you going to put the extra investable dollar in India or China or any other part of the region?
So it's a tough question, because I'm emotionally drawn to India. That's where I grew up, right? And it makes a lot of sense. And everything you folks have said about the demand in India is absolutely accurate, absolutely correct. However, the last point that Sumit made is a huge deterrent. There are players in India today who have got huge land banks from the government, huge loans from the government, who have who are talking the market, hyping the market up, which is making us very uneasy. So we decided that I would rather put that extra dollar into China or Australia or Indonesia and wait for Sumit to clean up India for us, and then we may come in after that.
Sumit, you want to take this over and give it back to Braham?
So Braham continues to put me in his part. But so look, again, the market is very strong, and we don't have a choice as Indian arm of a regional operator. I will fight for each and every dollar from my group to bring that back into India, and fortunately I've been getting whatever I wanted. So yeah, we plan to double our capacity every 3 years for the next 10 years, if that is any comforting statement for the country. Having said that, the challenges are real, and as I mentioned, we do need the market sentiment to be based on strong credentials and fundamentals and not on hype, which is what some players, the new ones, tend to be steering the market towards. So that's the only thing which I'd be very concerned about.
Thank you, Sumit. Nitin, you invested in AirTrunk. I want to hear that answer saying, are you bringing AirTrunk into India?
So, Shobhit, as you know, I will not be able to comment on anyone's specific business plan, but I think, see, all the global and regional operators are looking at India very, very closely, right? It's not a market which any data center operator can ignore, right? The timing will differ depending on their current business plans, where they're focused, where they have bandwidth in their teams or not, right? And the entry opportunities that India market offers. But I think every other operator is evaluating this market very closely. If they get the right movement, they will enter this market, right? And I must say, while like people mentioned about the risk, India always has risk, right? But I think it offers opportunities, as our Prime Minister keeps saying, India is a land of opportunity, right? So I think we need to just balance the opportunities and sorry, something has happened. Sorry. So we have to balance the risk and opportunities, right? And I think we get our act together. As I said, we need some partnership models running in this country. No one side can control all the risk in any particular in the business model. If we do it properly, I think there's sort of good returns to be made from this market.
Thank you, Nitin. Ben, you mentioned you met the government a few times. What's your view? You think Indian government is doing enough?
I looked at we were looking at trying to do a similar process for digitizing the planning rules in India, and it was very difficult, to say the least. So I think it's from a data point of view, I think you do need to, there's a lot of mapping companies, there's a lot of workforce that could do the work. But I think it is that, how do we start to make those planning rules a bit more open and digitized, and how do we get these data sets out that I think would drive a lot of efficiencies in the search process. So for me, it'd be about focusing on the data sets available, making that a bit more open, to really speed up that process and fulfill that demand. It sounds like the demand is there to put them out there, but it's around that data process.
Absolutely. John and Pawan, I'm going to just sort of ask one last question. Are you getting knocked at your door from all these data center operators who want to set up either co-locations or hyper scalers in India? And are you seeing more demand on the physical side of the space, to say the least? I know you guys are very busy with airports, but is data centers keeping you awake at night?
I think Pawan, you're probably best to take that, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's keeping us awake at night. It's keeping us busy through the day. We would like to be at the point where it's keeping us awake at night. So we are seeing some people coming up, knocking on the door. In some cases, we are still cautious, and for the kind of things that particularly Sumit mentioned, we are also cautious about who we would want to work with. We don't want to work with kind of the fly-by-night operators, and we are also going through an education process with them. But definitely there is an increasing demand. We are just hopeful that it's more of the people like Sumit and Braham that are there. Gaining the market share, because that will drive the whole industry in a proper direction.
Super, Pawan. I'm just going to quickly summarize what I heard from the six of you. Just one point each that I'm taking away, and I'm sure our audience will take away. Braham, you said COVID has accelerated the growth of data centers, and perhaps at least more a wish list saying responsible operators should benefit out of this. Sumit, you said operations are most important in evaluation of data centers, and it's not just about building them out, because that's perhaps the easier part. Then with your technology, I think deployment of capital in data centers will be led by tech. Otherwise, we're going to spend 6 months in finding the site and perhaps another 2 years in building it out. So technology is important, AI is important, site selections and others are going to be dependent on it. Nitin, your view was that in India, finding an operator is very critical to have a good investment return on data centers, while some local challenges and land permissions will continue, but more important is the operator and not the land developer or landowner. John, of course, you mentioned that this is a completely specialized asset class, right from design till commissioning, and I didn't realize that it takes you 6-8 months to commission a data center. I don't know how much time Braham is going to spend in his new facility. Is it 6 months post or pre? And of course, Pawan, you said India is at an advantageous position as far as renewable is concerned, and we may skip one step and build all our data centers green from the very beginning. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the call, for contributing. I really appreciate your time, especially all of you are from different cities. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Shobhit. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Really enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Bye-bye.